Hey, quick question. Have you ever had one of those nights where you lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, and you whisper to yourself, "This can't be it, right? There's gotta be more"? Picture Mike, 36 years old. Lives in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago. 2 kids, a wife he loves, and a warehouse job that pays the bills but sucks the life out of him. On paper, he's doing okay. Mortgage is current. Kids are healthy. But every single morning when that alarm hits at 5:47, he feels this heavy weight on his chest. Not sadness exactly, more like this quiet, constant voice saying, "You're stuck, man. This is as good as it gets." Mike wasn't always like this. Back in high school, he was the guy who stayed up all night sketching business ideas, talking about how he'd build something big one day. He wanted to take his family to Disney World every summer, coach his son's baseball team, maybe even start that little landscaping company he used to dream about. But somewhere along the way, life just happened. Layoffs, medical bills, arguments that never really got solved. Slowly, his emotions started calling the shots. One bad day at work and he'd come home quiet, shut down, snap at the kids over nothing. One fight with his wife and he'd replay it in his head for days, feeling smaller and smaller. He hated it. He hated feeling powerless. Like there was this giant version of himself somewhere deep down, strong, confident, in control, but it was locked away, sleeping, while the everyday version of Mike just kept going through the motions. One rainy Thursday night, after the kids were finally in bed, Mike was scrolling on his phone, half watching old videos, when he stumbled across this tall, loud guy with a huge smile and a voice that sounded like it could wake the dead. Tony Robbins. The guy was on stage telling a packed arena that your life isn't decided by what happens to you, it's decided by the decisions you make in the tough moments. Mike almost scrolled past. But something in Tony's energy wouldn't let him. He paused. Listened. Then, without thinking twice, he tapped by now on a book called Awaken the Giant Within. $20. What could it hurt? 2 days later, the book showed up on his doorstep. Mike cracked it open after dinner, expecting another one of those think positive books that never actually worked. But Tony didn't start with sunshine and rainbows. He started with the cold, honest truth: the quality of your life is the quality of your decisions. Mike felt that line hit him right in the chest. Tony explained that most people let their emotions run the show. You feel bad, so you eat junk. You feel stressed, so you scroll for hours. You feel scared, so you stay small and safe. But here's the crazy part: you can actually change how you feel in a single moment. Not by waiting for life to get better. Not by hoping. By doing 3 simple things: change what you focus on, change the way you move your body, and change the words you use. Mike sat there in his recliner, the house quiet except for the fridge humming. He decided to try it right then. He stood up straight, shoulders back, took a deep breath like Tony said, forced a big smile even though he felt stupid, and said out loud, "I'm in control. Right now." For the first time in months, something shifted. Just a tiny spark. Like a giant somewhere deep inside stretched and opened one eye. He kept reading. Tony talked about beliefs, the stories we tell ourselves that become our reality. Mike realized he'd been carrying around this old belief for years: I'm not the kind of guy who gets ahead. I'm just average. That belief had been quietly steering every decision he made. The next morning at work, Mike tried something small. Instead of dragging himself through the shift, he walked in with purpose, smiled at the guys on the dock, and focused on one thing: today I'm going to find one way to make this job better. Nothing huge. Just a shift in focus. By lunch he already felt different. Lighter. More alive. But here's where it gets interesting. That same afternoon his boss called him into the office. The guy looked serious. "Mike, we're reorganizing. Things are tight. I need you to step up and lead the new night crew starting next week, or we're gonna have to let some people go." Mike's stomach dropped. Night crew meant missing his kids' bedtime every single night. It meant more stress, less family time, and a schedule that would wreck the little bit of peace he had left. The old Mike would have nodded, said whatever you need, and walked out feeling defeated, already imagining the fights with his wife and the guilt with his kids. But this time, something was different. He remembered what he read the night before. Decisions shape destiny. Not circumstances. Decisions. His heart was racing. His palms were sweaty. The giant inside him was wide awake now, watching, waiting to see what he would do. Mike looked his boss dead in the eye and said the words he never thought he'd say. "I'll do it. But I have one condition." The boss raised an eyebrow. The room got quiet. And that's when Mike realized this one conversation, this one decision, was about to change everything. But he had no idea if it was going to make his life better, or blow it all up. Mike looked his boss dead in the eye and said the words he never thought he'd say. "I'll do it. But I have one condition." The boss leaned back in his chair, eyebrows up, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they were waiting for the punchline. "A condition? All right, Mike. Hit me." Mike's heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. But he remembered what he'd read 2 nights ago in that book. Tony Robbins said your body language isn't just some fluff, it actually changes how you feel. So Mike stood a little taller, kept his shoulders back, and spoke like the guy he wanted to become, not the guy who was scared of losing everything. "I'll run the night crew," Mike said, voice steady. "But I want 2 things. First, I get to keep my mornings free so I can still get the kids on the bus. Second, I want a shot at training the new guys my way. No more yelling in shortcuts. We do it right." The boss stared at him for a long second. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to hear. Then he let out a short laugh, half surprised, half impressed. "You've been reading self-help books or something? All right. Deal. But if it doesn't work, it's on you." Mike walked out of that office feeling like he'd just stepped off a roller coaster. His hands were still shaking, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something electric. For the first time in years, he hadn't just taken whatever life handed him. He'd made a decision. And that decision felt huge. He got home that night before the kids were asleep. Sarah, his wife, was in the kitchen wiping down the counter, looking tired but happy to see him early. The second he told her about the new role, her smile faded a little. "Night crew," she said quietly. "Mike, that means you won't be here for dinner. Or bedtime stories. Or us." He could see the worry in her eyes. The same worry that used to make him shrink back and say, It's just how it is, babe." But tonight he didn't shrink. He pulled her close, looked her right in the face, and used the exact words Tony talked about: changing your vocabulary changes your life. "This isn't forever," he told her. "This is me stepping up so we can finally get ahead. I'm not just showing up anymore, Sarah. I'm leading. And I'm gonna make it work for us." She searched his face for a second, like she was trying to figure out who this new version of her husband was. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay. I believe you. Just don't disappear on us." That night, after the kids were down, Mike didn't scroll on his phone like usual. He opened the book again. Tony was talking about something called the pain-pleasure principle. Basically, every decision we make comes down to one thing: will this bring me more pain or more pleasure? Most people avoid pain at all costs and chase quick pleasure, junk food, endless scrolling, saying yes when they want to say no. But the giants? They link massive pleasure to the hard stuff and massive pain to staying the same. Mike grabbed a notebook and did the exercise right there on the kitchen table. He wrote down every reason staying stuck hurt more than changing. He pictured missing his kids' games. He pictured the quiet arguments with Sarah turning into real distance. He pictured waking up at 50 still wondering what if. Then he flipped it and wrote what success would feel like: coming home proud, taking the family on that Disney trip, coaching Little League without worrying about the bills. He closed the notebook feeling different. Focused. Like the giant inside him had just sat up and started paying attention. The next week on the job, Mike showed up early for his first night shift. The crew was the usual mix: some guys dragging their feet, others already counting down the hours. Instead of barking orders like the old supervisor used to, Mike gathered them in a quick huddle. "Look," he said, "we're gonna do this different. We're gonna work smart, not just hard. And every single one of you is gonna leave here knowing you made a difference today." He smiled big, moved with energy, used the exact body language Tony described. And you know what? A couple of the guys actually straightened up. By the end of that first brutal shift, the crew had knocked out more work than they had in weeks. The boss even walked by and gave Mike a nod. "Keep it up." Mike drove home at 6 a.m. with the sun just coming up, windows down, feeling alive for the first time in forever. He stopped at the corner store, grabbed flowers for Sarah, and made it home in time to wake the kids with pancakes. For a moment, everything felt possible. But here's where things got complicated. 2 days later, Mike was in the middle of training the new night guys when his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. One word: "Call me." He stepped outside into the cold night air and dialed. Her voice was shaky on the other end. "Mike, the school called. Our son got in a fight on the playground. He's okay, but he's really upset. He said some kid was picking on him and he finally stood up for himself, just like you've been talking about standing up at work. But now he's scared he's in trouble." Mike's stomach twisted. He could hear his little boy crying in the background. All the good feelings from the last few days suddenly felt fragile. Was he really changing things for the better, or was he just making everything harder for the people he loved most? He told Sarah he'd be home as soon as he could, hung up, and leaned against the warehouse wall. The giant inside him was wide awake now, but so was the fear. Because for the first time, Mike realized something Tony hadn't spelled out in the first chapters: When you start waking up the giant, the people around you start waking up too. And sometimes that's messy. Sometimes it's scary. He looked at the dark parking lot, heart racing again, and whispered to himself, "All right, now what?" Because the real test wasn't the night crew. It wasn't the conversation with his boss. It was walking through the front door tonight and facing a scared little boy who was only trying to do what his dad was finally learning to do. And Mike had no idea if he had the right words, or if he was about to let them both down. Mike stood there in the cold parking lot for a second longer, phone still in his hand, the warehouse lights buzzing behind him. The night air felt heavier now. He jumped in his truck, started the engine, and headed home with the radio off. No music. Just the sound of his own thoughts racing. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the house lights were still on. Sarah met him at the door, arms crossed, eyes tired but soft. "He's in his room," she whispered. "Won't come out. Keeps saying he messed everything up, just like you used to say about work." Mike nodded, kicked off his boots, and walked down the hallway like he was walking into a storm. He stopped outside his son's door, took one of those deep breaths Tony talked about, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside. Little Jake was curled up on the bed, face buried in his pillow, shoulders shaking just a little. 8 years old and already trying to carry the weight of the world. Mike sat on the edge of the bed, didn't say anything at first. Just put a hand on his boy's back. "Hey, buddy," Mike said, voice low and steady. "Want to tell me what happened?" Jake rolled over, eyes red. "This kid kept pushing me, calling me names. I finally pushed back. Now the teacher says I'm the one in trouble. I was just trying to be strong like you said you're gonna be at your new job." Mike felt that one right in the chest. The same words he'd been saying to himself the last few days were now coming out of his kid's mouth. For a second he wanted to tell Jake, "It's okay, just apologize and it'll blow over." That's what the old Mike would have done, keep the peace, avoid the hard conversation. But something inside him shifted. The giant was awake. He looked Jake straight in the eyes and said, "You know what? I'm proud of you for standing up. Real proud. But here's the thing, son, being strong isn't just about pushing back. It's about deciding how you show up after the push." Mike paused, remembering the exact line from the book he'd read that morning. Tony said your words create your world. So Mike chose better ones. "Tomorrow we're gonna go talk to the teacher together. Not to fight. To own it. You're gonna tell them what happened, and I'm gonna back you up. Because real strength? That's what it looks like." Jake stared at him, like he was seeing his dad for the first time in a long time. Slowly, the tears stopped. "You really mean that?" "Yeah," Mike said. "I really do." They talked for almost an hour. Mike didn't lecture. He listened. Then he showed Jake the simple trick he'd been using, shoulders back, big smile even when you don't feel like it, and say out loud, "I control how I feel right now." They practiced it together, both of them standing there in pajamas looking a little silly, but laughing by the end. Jake even cracked a smile. When Mike finally walked out of the room, Sarah was waiting in the hallway. She pulled him into a hug and whispered, "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but I like it. Keep doing whatever you're doing." For the first time in years, Mike went to bed feeling like the man of the house again, not just the guy paying the bills. The next few days flew by in a blur of night shifts and early mornings. The crew at work was actually starting to listen to him. Production numbers were up. His boss even pulled him aside and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. People are talking." Mike was riding that wave, using every little thing from the book, changing his focus, moving with energy, linking pain to staying small. But life has a funny way of testing you right when you think you're finally getting ahead. It was the following Friday night. Mike was halfway through his shift when his phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Sarah. It was the boss. "Mike, get to the office. Now." He walked in expecting another pat on the back. Instead, the boss looked stressed, papers scattered everywhere. "Listen," the boss said, rubbing his temples. "Corporate is coming in next week for a surprise audit. They're looking at the whole night operation. If your crew doesn't hit the new targets I promised them, we're all in trouble. And since you're the one who asked to do things your way, this is on you." Mike's stomach tightened. New targets? They were already pushing hard. One slip and the whole thing could fall apart. He thought about the extra hours, the missed family time, the promise he'd made to Sarah and Jake. The old Mike would have said, "I'll figure it out," and then quietly panicked for days. But this Mike? He felt that familiar spark again, the giant stretching, ready. He looked at his boss and said, "Give me 24 hours. I'll come back with a plan that works. Not just for the audit, but one that makes this crew unstoppable." The boss raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. "You've got balls lately, Mike. I like it. 24 hours. Don't let me down." Mike drove home that morning with the sun coming up again, but this time the weight was heavier. He had one day to figure out how to completely change how his crew worked. One day to prove that waking up the giant inside wasn't just some feel-good idea, it actually worked when everything was on the line. He pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat there for a minute. Through the kitchen window he could see Sarah and Jake laughing over breakfast. His family. His reason. But as he walked inside, Sarah turned around with a look he hadn't seen in a while, a mix of hope and worry. "Mike, I got a call from the school again. They want a meeting about Jake. And this time they mentioned possible suspension if we don't handle it right." She paused, then added quietly, "Are we really ready for all this change? Or are we just making things harder?" Mike stood there in the doorway, heart pounding again. The giant inside him was fully awake now, roaring. But for the first time, he wondered if he could actually keep up with it. Because tomorrow wasn't just about saving his job. Tomorrow he had to walk into that school and prove to his son and to himself that the man he was becoming could actually protect what mattered most. And he still had no idea if one book, one decision at a time, was going to be enough, or if everything was about to come crashing down. Mike stood frozen in the doorway, keys still in his hand, the smell of pancakes and coffee hanging in the air like nothing was wrong. Sarah's words landed heavy. They mentioned possible suspension if we don't handle it right. He felt that old familiar pull, the urge to shrink, to say we'll figure it out, and hope it all blew over. But the giant inside him was already on its feet. He walked over, kissed Sarah on the forehead, and said, "We got this. Both of us. Together." Then he looked at Jake, who was pushing eggs around his plate with his fork. "Hey champ, eat up. We're going to that meeting today, and we're walking in like we belong there." Jake looked up, eyes wide. "You're coming with me?" "Wouldn't miss it," Mike said, forcing that big smile Tony talked about. Even though his stomach was in knots, his body believed the smile first. And just like the book promised, his mind started to follow. 2 hours later they were sitting in the principal's office, Mike in his work boots, Jake in his little hoodie, Sarah holding Mike's hand under the table. The teacher laid it out. The other kids started it, but Jake pushed back harder than the rules allowed. Suspension was on the table. Most dads would have gotten defensive. Mike didn't. He remembered the chapter he'd read at 4 a.m. that morning, the one about changing your beliefs. He used to believe he was just a regular guy who couldn't fix big problems. Today he chose a new belief: I'm the man who faces things head on. So he looked the principal in the eye and said, "My son made a mistake. We own that." But the other boy was bullying him for weeks. Jake finally stood up. "Instead of punishing him, how about we turn this into a lesson for everybody? I'll come in next week and talk to the whole class about how to handle tough moments without losing control. Real talk. No fancy words." The room went quiet. The principal leaned back, surprised. Jake sat up a little straighter. Sarah squeezed Mike's hand so tight he almost winced. 10 minutes later they walked out with no suspension, just a warning and Mike's promise to speak at the assembly. Jake hugged his dad in the parking lot like he'd just won the Super Bowl. On the drive home Mike felt a rush he hadn't felt since he was a kid. He'd used the exact tools from the book, new belief, new words, new body language, and it actually worked. The giant wasn't just awake anymore. It was starting to run the show. But the day wasn't over. Back at the house Mike had exactly 8 hours before his next night shift, and he still needed that plan for the corporate audit. He spread out a notebook on the kitchen table, exactly like Tony suggested when you want massive results. He wrote one question at the top: what would the best version of me do right now? Then he got to work. He didn't overthink it. He broke the night cruise problems down like Tony broke down decisions. Focus on what you can control. He designed a simple new system: quick morning huddles, clear daily targets written on a whiteboard, and a win of the day shout out at the end of every shift. Nothing complicated. Just small changes that added up. He even drew a little chart showing how the cruise numbers could hit the new corporate goal without anyone burning out. When he finished, he looked at the clock. It was already time to head back to the warehouse. He kissed Sarah goodbye and told Jake, "You did good today, buddy. Remember, one decision at a time." Then he drove to work feeling unstoppable. He walked straight into the boss's office and slid the notebook across the desk. 24 hours, Mike said. "Here's the plan." The boss flipped through the pages, eyebrows climbing higher with every page. When he looked up, he wasn't smiling, he was grinning. "Mike, this is actually good. Really good. Corporate's moving the audit up. They're coming in tomorrow night instead of next week. You ready to run this thing live?" Mike's stomach flipped. Tomorrow? He'd expected more time. But he didn't let it show. He stood tall, smiled that big confident smile, and said, "We're ready." The boss clapped him on the shoulder. "Then let's do it." That whole night shift Mike ran the new system like he'd been doing it for years. The crew bought in. They hit every target. Guys who used to drag their feet were actually laughing and competing to be the best. By the time the sun came up, the warehouse looked different. Felt different. Mike drove home exhausted but wired. He walked in the front door to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jake practicing his lines for the school assembly. Sarah met him with a hug that lasted longer than usual. "You're really doing it," she whispered. "I can see it. The kids can see it. I'm so damn proud of you." Mike held her tight, feeling that emotional payoff Tony always talked about, the moment when all the hard work suddenly feels worth it. But as they stood there in the kitchen, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was the boss again. One text. "Corporate just called. They want to meet you personally after the audit tomorrow. They liked what they heard about the changes. Don't screw this up, Mike. This could be big." Mike stared at the screen. Big? Like promotion big? Like finally getting ahead big? He set the phone down slowly. For the first time, the giant inside him felt nervous. Not scared. Nervous. Because tomorrow night wasn't just about saving the night crew anymore. It was about stepping into a whole new level. And if he nailed it, everything could change: the money, the schedule, the life they'd always talked about. But if he choked, if the old beliefs crept back in at the wrong moment, he looked at Sarah and Jake laughing together and felt the weight of it all. Because tomorrow he wasn't just showing up for an audit. Tomorrow he was walking into the biggest decision of his life so far, and he still had one last chapter of that book to read before he faced it. He didn't know it yet, but that final chapter was about to hit him harder than anything else in the whole book. And the words he was about to read would make him question everything he thought he knew about who he really was.